The day I ate from my friend's lunchbox was my last day as a human. Now my parents can't see me. I don't remember a time when we were not poor. Poverty wasn't something that came to us suddenly. It was the only life we ever knew. We lived in a small house at the edge of the village, a house that looked like it was holding itself together out of pity. The walls were made of cracked clay, patched with pieces of cement papa found at construction sites. The roof, made from rusted zinc, sang loudly whenever it rained, and the floor was always cold because there was no tile, no carpet, just dry earth. We had no electricity. At night, Mama would light a small lantern with a weak flame, and we'd all sit around it as if it were a sun. The smoke stung our eyes, but it was better than darkness. Papa used to say, "We are not lazy people, Amara. We just haven't found our luck yet." He said it every time he came home tired and empty-handed. Papa was a man who could do any job that promised even a few naira. Some days he worked as a bricklayer at building sites, under the scorching sun, carrying cement bags twice his weight. Other days, when there was no construction work, he went to the motor park to help load buses. For every load he carried, he got 10 or 20 naira, sometimes just a God bless you. When even that failed, he went around with a borrowed wheelbarrow, hoping someone would need help carrying something: firewood, yams, bags of rice, anything that meant he wouldn't come home empty. His palms were always hard, full of blisters, and sometimes he bled. But he never complained. He just wiped the sweat from his face and said, "It's better to work than to beg." Mama too worked. Her work was different, but just as hard. She washed clothes for people, big buckets full of dirty wrappers and bedsheets, from morning till evening. Her hands were always white from soap, and her back bent from bending over basins. Some people paid her 50 naira. Some gave her leftover food instead of money. She sold vegetables too, tomatoes, pepper, okra, on a small tray she carried on her head. Sometimes she would walk under the sun for hours and still come home with half of them unsold. And on bad days, when everything spoiled, she'd sigh and say softly, "At least we tried." Then she'd start cutting firewood or picking palm kernels to sell. Even I worked, though I was only 10. After school, I fetched water for neighbors, 10 naira per jerry can. The rope used to draw water from the well always cut into my palms, but I didn't mind. Sometimes I helped people sweep their compounds or wash their plates, and in return, they gave me coins or small food, a few spoons of rice, a biscuit, or a mango. We lived one day at a time. There was no savings, no plans for the future, only survival. Some nights, we didn't have dinner. We just drank water and went to bed early so the hunger wouldn't hurt too much. On lucky nights, Mama would make Gary soaked in cold water with a few ground nuts if we had any. I used to imagine it was rice and stew. I'd close my eyes and chew slowly, pretending it was sweet. The neighbors weren't any better. In our compound, almost everyone was poor. You could tell from the smell of the kitchens, thin soups, empty pots, sometimes just smoke with no food cooking. People fought easily over debts, over small money, over borrowed cups of rice that were never returned. I used to watch the other children playing and laughing, and I wondered how they could be so happy when life was this hard. But Mama said, "Laughter is free. It's the only thing poverty hasn't taken from us yet." We lived like that, working, hopping, praying. Papa's dream was to save enough money to buy a motorcycle and start a transport business. Mama's dream was simpler, to see me finish school and wear a white shirt like the nurses she admired at the health center. But dreams were expensive, and we could barely afford food. Some mornings, Papa would go out without eating, saying he'd buy bread later. But I knew he wouldn't. Some evenings, Mama would pretend she wasn't hungry, saying she had eaten in the market. But she hadn't. They gave me their share, even when there was almost nothing to share. That's the kind of love we had, quiet, painful but real. We were poor, yes, but we still believed that if we worked hard enough, if we prayed loud enough, life would eventually hear us. I didn't know then that some kinds of hunger could do worse than empty your stomach. They could change your destiny forever. But that part of the story came later. For now, All I knew was that we were a family that worked with tired hands and hopeful hearts, scraping for survival one day at a time. In our house, food was never something you could count on. We didn't eat 3 times a day, that was for rich people, or for people who had salaries and fridges and kitchens full of plates. For us, food came like a visitor, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. On good days, we ate twice, once in the morning, once at night. On bad days, we ate only once. And on the worst days, we drank water and told our stomachs to keep quiet. Breakfast was a luxury. Most mornings, Mama would say, "Eat in school, Amara. There's no food now." But there was never food waiting at school either. Sometimes I'd chew dry Gary before leaving the house, swallowing it slowly so it could last longer in my mouth. Other times, I went on an empty stomach, pretending I wasn't hungry so Mama wouldn't feel bad. I could see the guilt in her eyes every time she watched me tie my school sandals with shaking hands. "Be strong, my daughter," she would whisper, pressing her rough palm on my cheek. And I always said, "Yes, Mama," even when I felt weak. Papa, too, was always hungry. He'd come home from work with his shirt soaked in sweat, his eyes tired. When Mama served him food, usually a small plate of eba and watery soup, he would push half of it toward me and say, "Eat, my girl. You need to grow." I always wanted to tell him that I was already growing, but in the wrong way, thinner, weaker, smaller every day. We never complained, though. We had learned to live with hunger as if it were part of the family. At night, our house was quiet except for the sound of frogs croaking outside and our stomachs rumbling softly. Sometimes Mama would start to hum gospel songs to distract us, and Papa would join in, his deep voice filling the dark. Mama always said, "As long as we have life, we have hope." But sometimes, even hope felt hungry. School days. When I went to school, I carried an old bag that used to belong to one of my cousins. The zippers were broken, and one strap had been tied with a piece of rope. I didn't care. I was proud to have it. My school was small, dusty, and always noisy. During lessons, I tried to pay attention, but my mind often wandered, not because I didn't want to learn, but because my stomach made it impossible to focus. Hunger makes you forget things, words, numbers, even your name when the teacher shouts it. Sometimes I would rest my head on the desk, pretending to be sleepy when really, I was dizzy. The classroom smelled of chalk, sweat, and food from other pupils' lunchboxes. That smell always made my heart ache. During break time, I'd sit quietly, pretending I wasn't hungry, watching others unwrap bread, rice, and biscuits. Some shared among themselves, others hid their food to avoid beggars like me. I never begged loudly. I only looked long, silent looks that said everything I couldn't say. Sometimes, if I was lucky, a kind classmate would give me a piece of biscuit or a spoon of rice. But most times, I got nothing. By the time I got home in the afternoon, Mama would already be back from washing people's clothes, sitting outside with tired eyes. Sometimes she'd have managed to cook something small, yam porridge without fish, rice without stew, Gary with palm oil. We ate whatever it was gratefully, no matter how small. Dinner was often the same food from afternoon, warmed and divided carefully. Papa always gave me the biggest portion. He and Mama shared what was left. That's how we lived, counting grains, saving crumbs, hopping for miracles. 3 meals a day was something we heard about in school, like fairy tales or stories from another world. When my teacher asked us to write an essay about my favorite meal, I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't know what to write. We didn't have favorite meals. We just had food, any food, when God provided. Still, I wrote about rice and chicken. Not because I had eaten it, but because I had imagined it so many times that it almost felt real. That was the life we lived, a life where food was rare, work was endless, and hope was the only thing that didn't cost money. I didn't know then that hunger would soon lead me into something far worse than poverty. Something that would take more than my life. It would take my soul. By the time I was 10, I already knew that life wasn't fair. I didn't wait to grow up before I started working. poverty didn't give me that choice. When other children spent their evenings playing 10-10 and hide and seek, I was out on the dusty road, carrying a tray on my head, shouting the names of the things I sold. Sometimes it was sachet water. Sometimes ground nuts or pure honey Mama had bought on credit from a woman at the market. And sometimes it was just small sticks of firewood tied together with old rope. The tray was almost bigger than my head, but I balanced it carefully as I walked from street to street. The sun was always hot, and the dust clung to my legs like red powder. My throat would dry up from shouting, but I couldn't stop. Buy pure water. Groundnut, fresh groundnut. Most people walked past without looking. Some waved me away. A few bought, not because they needed what I sold, but because they pitied me. When I made a sale, I'd smile shyly and say, "Thank you, Ma." Then I'd count the coins with trembling hands, trying to make sure I didn't lose any. Every coin mattered. Sometimes I made 50 naira in a day, sometimes nothing. When I returned home, Mama would ask, "How much did you sell today?" If the money was small, I'd lower my eyes and say, "People didn't buy." She'd sigh and pat my head gently, her smile tired. "It's okay, my child. Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow was never much better. When there was no hawking to do, I followed Mama to people's farms. We worked for food or for a few coins. The farms were far, sometimes an hour's walk under the burning sun. Mama tied her wrapper high around her waist, and I followed her with a hoe almost taller than me. The soil was rough and dry, and each time I dug, dust filled my nose and mouth. We weeded, planted, and harvested for others cassava, maize, vegetables. When the farm owner was kind, they gave us some of the produce to take home. On good days, we went home with small tubers of yam or a handful of maize. On bad days, they just said, "Thank you for your help," and nothing more. I used to watch Mama's hands as she worked. They were strong, darkened by the sun, but they shook sometimes when she lifted the hoe. Still, she never stopped. "This is the life we have," she would say, wiping sweat from her face. "As long as we keep working, we won't starve." But even work didn't always stop hunger. Sometimes, when the farms were empty and the markets were slow, we picked palm kernels in the bush. We carried sacks, looking for fallen palm fruits, cracking them open with stones to get the kernels inside. The shells cut my fingers, and the heat from the sun burned my back, but I kept going. When we filled the sack, we sold it for a few hundred naira, money that disappeared as quickly as it came. Some evenings, Papa joined us. He didn't talk much then, just worked quietly, his jaw tight, his face hard. I knew he hated seeing me labor like that, but what else could we do? We were poor, but we refused to sit still and wait for hunger to win. I remember one night clearly. We came home late from the farm, our feet sore, our stomachs empty. Mama had earned 150 naira that day. She used it to buy Gary and a small piece of fish. That night we ate together in silence, sitting on the floor. The soup was thin, the fish divided carefully among us. When I chewed my small piece, I closed my eyes and imagined it was big and juicy. Mama smiled at me. "You see," she said, "all this work, it's for you. One day you'll go to school and wear fine clothes. You won't suffer like us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But in my heart, I wondered if that kind of life even existed for people like us. Still, I worked. Every day. Under the sun, under the rain, barefoot and tired, because that was the only way I knew how to live. We weren't lazy. We weren't careless. We were just poor, the kind of poor that made you work all day and still sleep hungry at night. But no matter how hard we worked, it always felt like the more we tried, the deeper we sank. And yet, we never stopped believing. Because if we stopped working, if we stopped hopping, then what else did we have left? Even though life was hard, Mama never let me miss school. She said education was the only ladder that could pull a poor child out of the mud. "Amara," she would say every morning, "no matter how hungry you are, go and learn something. That's the one thing nobody can take from you." So I went tired, hungry, barefoot sometimes, but I went. Our school was far from home, about a 40-minute walk. I left early, before the sun was fully awake, my books tied in a small nylon bag to protect them from dust and rain. My uniform was old and thin, washed so many times that it had lost its color. Mama stitched it often. But the thread was beginning to give way again. Still, I wore it proudly. It was my badge of hope. The road to school was long and dusty. On the way, I saw other children, some in neat uniforms, others like me, carrying old bags and empty stomachs. We walked together sometimes, talking about our dreams. "I want to be a nurse," one girl said. "I'll be a teacher," another added. When it got to my turn, I said, "I want to be anything that makes me rich enough to buy food every day." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. By the time I reached school, my feet were already dirty, and my stomach growled loudly. I tried to sit still in class and focus, but hunger is louder than any teacher's voice. Sometimes I felt lightheaded, and the words on the chalkboard danced before my eyes. When the teacher asked a question, I wanted to raise my hand, but my body felt too weak. During break time, the smell of food filled the air: rice and stew, bread and egg, puff puff and milk. The other children opened their lunchboxes eagerly, laughing and chatting. I just sat quietly, pretending I wasn't hungry. I always carried an empty water bottle to school. I'd fill it with water from the school tap and sip it slowly, tricking my stomach into thinking it was full. Sometimes, when my hunger became too much, I'd leave the classroom and sit under the mango tree behind the school. I'd close my eyes and imagine I was eating with the others. I'd imagine Mama smiling and saying, "Eat well, my daughter." But when I opened my eyes, there was only dust and silence. Despite everything, I still loved learning. I liked the way the teacher's chalk scratched against the board, the way letters formed words and words formed meaning. I liked reading stories, especially the ones about children who started poor and ended up successful. I always told myself, one day that will be me. But dreams are hard to hold on to when you're hungry. Sometimes I came late to school because I had to hawk sachet water first in the morning. Sometimes I missed a whole day because Mama needed me to help her in someone's farm. The teachers scolded me often. "Amara, why are you always absent?" I wanted to tell them that I wasn't lazy, that I was just trying to survive, but I kept quiet. One teacher, Mrs. Kioma, liked me. She said I was bright. Sometimes she gave me old exercise books and pencils. Once, she even gave me a piece of meat from her lunch. I thanked her, but that single act made me cry later at home, not from sadness, but from the shock of what kindness felt like. Every night, when I finished my chores, I'd sit by the dim lantern and read my notes until sleep came. The smoke from the lamp made my eyes water, but I didn't stop. Papa would look at me and smile weakly. "One day," he said, "this book you're reading will bring us out of this life." And I believed him, because I had too. We didn't have food, we didn't have wealth, but we had hope. And school was my hope, my only door to a life that didn't smell of sweat and hunger. But hunger never stopped following me. It sat beside me in class, walked home with me, slept next to me at night. And it was hunger, that same, quiet hunger, that one day led me to do something I shouldn't have done. Something that changed everything. Hunger was my closest friend. It followed me everywhere, to the farm, to the market, and especially to school. At first, I tried to hide it. When my classmates opened their lunchboxes, I would pretend to be busy with something, maybe flipping through my book or pretending to sleep on my desk. But hunger doesn't like to be ignored. It growls, loudly and shamelessly, especially when others are eating. Soon, my classmates began to notice. "Amara, haven't you eaten?" one would ask. I'd smile weakly and say, "I'm not hungry." But my stomach would always betray me, with a loud sound that made everyone laugh. Sometimes they pitied me, sometimes they didn't. Children can be kind, but they can also be cruel without meaning to. I began to beg, quietly at first. When I saw someone with bread and akara, I'd whisper, Please just give me small. When someone had biscuits, I'd say, let me just taste. Some shared a piece, a crumb, a drop of drink. Others turned away. The ones who gave me something, even the smallest piece, became heroes in my heart. I remembered every single one of them. The girl who once gave me half of her meat pie. The boy who let me lick his spoon after he finished his custard. Sometimes I'd collect leftover rice that others didn't want and eat it behind the school toilet, away from their eyes. It didn't matter that it was cold or that sand had mixed with it. It was food. One day, a girl named Uju brought fried yam and stew. The smell filled the entire classroom. I sat beside her, watching as she opened her lunchbox. My throat tightened, my stomach twisted. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The oil on the yam glistened like gold. She looked at me and said, "Amara, you want?" I nodded before I could stop myself. She gave me just one piece, one small piece, and I thanked her like she had given me the world. That one bite felt like heaven. The oil coated my tongue, and I chewed slowly, trying to make it last longer. When I swallowed, I felt a strange mix of joy and shame. After that day, begging became part of my life at school. I wasn't proud of it. Each time I opened my mouth to beg, it felt like I was swallowing my dignity. But hunger has a way of silencing pride. I learned how to beg gently, how to smile in a way that made people pity me. I learned how to read faces, who would give, who wouldn't, who would mock me if I asked. Sometimes they'd say, "Amara, you're always begging," and laugh. I'd laugh too, pretending not to feel the sting in their words. But when I went home later, I'd cry into my pillow. Mama told me not to beg. She said, "No matter how hungry you are, never beg. It reduces you." But she didn't understand how hard it was to sit in a class full of children eating bread, biscuits, and rice, while your stomach ached so badly that you couldn't even think straight. Some teachers noticed, too. Once, my class teacher caught me looking longingly at another girl's food. After class, she called me aside and pressed a small pack of chin-chin into my hand. "Don't tell anyone," she whispered. I thanked her. My eyes watered as I walked home that day, holding the chin-chin tightly as if it was a treasure. I shared it with Mama that night. We both ate in silence, pretending it was a feast. But the hunger never ended. It was like a curse that sat in my belly and whispered, "Just one more bite, just one more meal." Even when I had eaten, I still wanted more, because I never knew when the next food would come. Every day at school, I prayed that someone would share their meal. I prayed for a miracle, something that would fill me completely. And one day, that miracle came. But it didn't come as I expected. It came as a lunchbox. A lunchbox that did not belong to me. And that was the day everything changed. Her name was Chisholm. She was my seatmate. From the very first day she joined our class, I noticed her, not because she talked too much, but because everything about her looked different. Her bag was new. Her shoes were clean. Her hair always smelled like coconut oil. And then there was her lunchbox. Every day, she brought one. Sometimes it was red, sometimes blue, sometimes a shiny silver flask that looked expensive. The smell that came from it could make even the strongest stomach growl. Fried rice with chicken, jollof rice with plantain, yam porridge with meat. Sometimes I could even smell stew thick with fish and spices that made my head spin. But she never ate it in class. Every break time, while the rest of us stayed back to eat or play, she'd carry her lunchbox, walk quietly out of the classroom, and disappear behind the school building. No one knew exactly where she went. Some said she liked eating alone. Others said she was just proud. I never asked her. I was too shy. I just sat there, watching her every day as she left with her lunchbox. When she came back, her lips would be stained with oil, her eyes shining like someone who had tasted something special. There were times she caught me looking at her food. "Why are you staring like that?" she asked, half smiling. I'd quickly look away and say, "Nothing." But deep down, I wanted to tell her, "Please, just one spoon. I'll never ask again." I didn't know how to say it. My mouth would freeze, my voice would hide. So I watched her, every day, take her lunchbox and leave. The smell of her food always lingered in the air, wrapping around me like invisible hands, teasing me, calling me. Chisholm was different from the rest of us. She never begged. She never joined us in school chores. Even when we swept the class, she'd just sit and file her nails or read a storybook. Her uniform was always neat, and her shoes never had dust on them. I used to wonder how she managed that when we all walked the same dusty road. One time, when rain fell heavily and flooded the school compound, the rest of us arrived soaked, our books wet, our feet covered in mud. But Chisholm, she came in dry, not a single drop on her. I asked her, "Did you fly to school?" She just smiled and said, "Maybe." The whole class laughed, but something about her smile that day made me feel cold inside. Still, I admired her. I admired how calm she always looked, how she always had food, how her hair was never rough, even on Mondays when everyone else looked tired from weekend chores. And most of all, I admired that lunchbox. That colorful, shiny lunchbox that I had seen every day but never touched. I dreamed about it sometimes. I dreamed of opening it and eating until I couldn't move. But dreams don't fill the stomach. Dreams only make hunger more painful. So every day I sat beside her, hungry, quiet, and wishing she would one day say, "Amara, come and eat with me." But she never did. Every day in school followed the same rhythm, the ringing bell, the noise of children running out, and then the smell. It always started like this. The moment the bell for break time rang, the air changed. Children shouted, chairs scraped, feet ran across the floor. And then, from the corner of the classroom where Chisholm sat beside me, came that sweet, heavy aroma that made everyone pause. Sometimes it was the smell of fried rice, green peas, and roasted chicken. Other times, it was jollof rice thick with oil, plantain fried to a golden brown, or noodles mixed with sausage and egg. Each day carried a new scent, like a new temptation designed only for me. She always did the same thing. She would stand up quietly, smooth her uniform, open her bag, and bring out her lunchbox. It was never just a lunchbox. It was a bright, beautiful container that looked too fine for our dusty classroom. She'd hold it close to her chest, look around the class like she was checking if anyone was watching, then walk out slowly. Always calm, always graceful. Sometimes, I watched her through the window as she walked down the school corridor. Her steps were always light, almost too light, like she wasn't touching the ground fully. She'd pass by the tap where other students washed their hands, then disappear behind the big mango tree at the edge of the school compound, the place where the sunlight barely touched. No one ever followed her there. Once, my friend Ngozi tried. She told me one day, "Let's go and see where that girl Dago chop." I was scared but curious, so we followed, slowly, carefully. We stopped when we reached the side of the building. From there, we could peep through the holes in the fence. And there she was. Chisholm sat under the mango tree, her lunchbox open in front of her, but she wasn't eating the way normal people eat. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't using a spoon either. She would take a piece of meat, look at it, smile, then put it in her mouth slowly, as if she was tasting something more than just food. She didn't chew fast. She didn't drink water. She just ate quietly, her eyes half closed, like someone in a trance. Sometimes she whispered things, words we couldn't hear. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ngozi and I looked at each other. "Let's go," I whispered. We ran back to the classroom before she could see us. After that day, I became more curious about her. She didn't act like the rest of us. When break was over and she returned to class, her face always looked fresh, like she had just washed it in cold water. Her eyes glowed, and her skin even seemed to shine more. I used to wonder how ordinary food could do that. Sometimes she'd hum quietly after eating, a strange melody none of us knew. It wasn't a song we sang in assembly, nor anything I'd heard on radio. The tune gave me chills, but she seemed at peace with it. One day, when the sun was hot and everyone was too tired to play outside, she sat in class after the bell rang. "Chisholm, you're not eating today?" I asked. She looked at me and smiled faintly. "Not here," she said softly. "I can't eat where people are watching." "Why?" I asked before I could stop myself. She glanced at me, her eyes a little too calm, a little too knowing. "Because my food is special," she said. Then she stood up, held her lunchbox close, and walked out as usual. I didn't know what she meant by special. But after that day, I started paying more attention. Sometimes she'd return before the bell ended, and the smell of her food would still follow her back into class, warm, spicy, sweet, like something that didn't belong in this world. Even the flies didn't go near her lunchbox. I once noticed that, no matter how sweet the food smelled, no fly ever landed on it. It was as if the food was protected by something unseen. A few times, when she forgot to close her bag properly, I caught a glimpse of what was inside. Pieces of fried meat that looked too red, rice that sparkled faintly as though dusted with tiny crystals, stew so thick and rich it didn't seem real. Once I thought I saw the food move, just a little like it was breathing. But I blinked, and it was still again. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. I started dreaming about that food. Dreaming of sitting under that same mango tree, opening her lunchbox, and eating until I couldn't breathe. I would wake up hungry and shaky, my mouth wet as if I had really eaten something. Every day, the urge grew stronger. Every day, my hunger whispered louder. "Just one bite, Amara. Just one bite. You deserve it." And every day, I told myself no. I told myself Mama was right. Never take what isn't yours. But the hunger was patient. It waited. It watched. After a while, Chisholm's habits stopped being just something I noticed. They became something I thought about. Every day, when the bell for break rang, she would rise gently, pick up her lunchbox, and walk out of class with the same quiet grace. Never in a hurry, never looking back. I'd watch her until she disappeared behind the mango tree. Always the same spot. Always alone. Sometimes I wondered why. Was it because she didn't like noise? Or because she didn't want to share her food with anyone? Either way, she never stayed to eat with us. Even when the weather was bad, when the sun was too hot or rain started drizzling, she would still go out. And somehow, she'd always come back dry, her food smell following her like perfume. There was something calm and grown-up about her that made me feel small. She never begged, never complained, never joined in the childish chatter that filled our class. When others fought, she just sat quietly, her face unreadable. She had the kind of confidence that didn't come from anything she said. It was just there, like she knew something the rest of us didn't. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to have food like hers, neat clothes like hers, and that calm look that said everything in her life was in order. But I didn't. I only had hunger. Sometimes, I tried to be her friend. "Your food smells nice," I'd say softly when she came back from eating. "Thank you," she'd reply, smiling faintly but never saying more. If I asked what she brought, she would just shrug. Something small. That was all she ever said. She never talked about her family either. I didn't know where she lived, who her parents were, or what they did. All I knew was that she always came to school clean, well-fed and quiet. And every day, she had that same lunchbox. One day, the teacher left the class for a meeting, and everyone started chatting. I turned to her and asked, "Why don't you eat with us?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. "I prefer peace when I eat," she said finally. "When people talk too much, food doesn't taste the same." I nodded, pretending to understand. But the truth was I didn't. Food was food to me. Whether people talked, shouted, or laughed, I would eat it all the same. But her words stuck in my mind. When people talk too much, food doesn't taste the same. Maybe she was just one of those quiet, private people, I thought. Or maybe her life was just too different from mine to understand. After that, I stopped trying to talk to her, but I couldn't stop watching. Each time she left for break, I'd glance at her desk. Her lunchbox always looked so beautiful and clean, with tiny designs on the lid, flowers, butterflies, sometimes stars. It wasn't just food to me anymore. It felt like something special. And because I could never have it, I wanted it even more. Sometimes, I'd imagine what the food inside looked like that day. Was it jollof rice with plantain? Was it beans and stew? Was there meat or egg? When she opened it in class by mistake once, the smell filled the room so quickly that even the teacher paused mid-sentence. Everyone turned. "Who is eating?" the teacher asked. Chisholm quietly closed her lunchbox and said, "Sorry, Ma." No one said anything after that, but I remember how my stomach twisted painfully, how my tongue watered until I swallowed air. I hated myself for wanting her food that badly. Then one afternoon, she didn't come to school. I missed her, or maybe I missed the smell of her lunch. That day, when the bell rang for break, the classroom felt too empty. Even though I was still hungry, the air didn't smell of anything sweet or spicy, just chalk and dust. And I realized something that scared me a little. I had become used to her presence, her quietness, her food. Like a routine I didn't know I depended on. The next day, she came back. Her uniform was as clean as ever. Her hair was perfectly made. "You didn't come yesterday," I said. She smiled lightly. "I was around," she said, "just not here." I didn't understand what that meant, but I didn't ask. All I knew was that she was back, and so was the smell of her food. That day, when she walked out with her lunchbox again, I watched her longer than usual. Something inside me said, "Follow her." But I didn't. Not yet. After some time, I made up my mind that I wouldn't beg for food again. It was too embarrassing. The way people looked at you, the way their voices changed when you asked. Some gave with pity in their eyes, others pretended not to hear. A few even laughed, whispering, "See her, she's always hungry." Each word cut deeper than hunger itself. So I promised myself, never again. If I would eat, I would earn it. That decision came with its own kind of suffering. Every morning before school, I started waking up earlier, long before the sun crawled out of the clouds. While other children still slept, I tied a wrapper over my uniform and went to help Mama at the market. We sold roasted corn, sometimes ground nuts, sometimes pepper, whatever we had that week. And when sales were bad, I would carry a tray on my head and walk from house to house calling out, "Buy corn, sweet corn." My voice would echo through the empty streets until my throat went dry. Sometimes people bought. Most times they didn't. By the time I got home, my feet were sore, my body sticky with sweat, and I barely had enough time to wash up before rushing to school. At school, I sat quietly, pretending to listen as the teacher spoke. But my mind was always somewhere else, thinking about how much I made that morning, how much Mama might have sold, or if we'd have enough to cook that night. Sometimes, when the teacher turned to the blackboard, I'd secretly count the coins in my pocket, 20 naira, 40, maybe 50. It looked like something when I held it in my palm. But when I thought of all we needed, food, soap, books, even kerosene, it felt like nothing. During weekends, when most of my classmates stayed home to rest or watch cartoons, I went to people's farms to weed. They said I was too small, but I didn't care. I bent under the sun from morning till afternoon, my hands darkened by the soil. Sometimes they gave me 500 naira. Other times, they gave me leftover food wrapped in nylon. I always took it home, for Mama, for my little brother. It didn't feel right to eat it alone. Still, no matter how hard I worked, the money disappeared as quickly as I earned it. It was like pouring water into a basket. If I bought food for us that day, there'd be nothing left for tomorrow. If I saved the money, then we'd sleep hungry. Every choice felt wrong. Every day felt like a test I was failing. And the worst part was going to school with an empty stomach and pretending everything was fine. I started carrying water for people at night, too. Old women would call, "NNE, help me fetch 1 bucket," and I'd run to the well. Sometimes they gave me a little money, sometimes just thanks. I took both, because I couldn't afford to refuse kindness. There were days when I worked so much that my palms cracked open, and I could see the thin white lines of pain when I clenched my fists. But I told myself it was better than begging, better than being laughed at. Yet even with all that effort, I still went to bed hungry. Every morning, my stomach rumbled loud enough that I had to press my hand against it in class to quiet the sound. When the bell for break rang, I tried to look busy, sharpening my pencil, pretending to read, anything to distract myself from the smell of other people's food. It became a habit, sitting quietly and acting uninterested, while my body screamed for a single grain of rice. Sometimes, Mama would pack something tiny for me, a few slices of soaked Gary wrapped in nylon, or 2 small biscuits left over from what she sold. I always thanked her, even though I knew it wouldn't last long. By the time I reached school, I'd already finished it. I told myself that someday, things would be different. That if I just worked harder, maybe we could finally eat like normal people. But someday didn't come. Days turned into weeks, and hunger became a constant shadow following me everywhere. Into class, into sleep, into dreams. It was around that time that I started noticing Chisholm more closely. The girl with the bright lunchbox, the girl who never seemed to know hunger. Her life felt like everything mine was. And without meaning to, I found myself watching her, wondering how it felt to eat without worry, to open your lunchbox every day and find something beautiful waiting inside. Mama always said a mother can live with hunger, but she can never bear to see her child starve. I didn't fully understand those words until I started catching her watching me. Not just watching, but studying me, the way sick people are studied by doctors. She would pretend to be busy, washing plates, stirring soup that had no meat in it. But her eyes would always find me. They carried this heavy, quiet sadness, the kind that didn't need tears to be seen. Sometimes, when I came back from school looking tired and hungry, she'd quickly smile and say, "NNE, I kept small food for you." But when I looked inside the pot, there would be only a few spoons of pap or rice stuck to the bottom. I'd eat it slowly, pretending I was full, pretending I didn't notice her own empty plate. One day, I told her, "Mama, why don't you eat too?" She smiled that weak smile that mothers wear when they're trying to be strong and said, "I already ate, don't worry about me." But I knew she hadn't. I could tell by the way her voice trembled, by how quickly she turned away. That night, I heard her stomach rumbling while she slept. I wanted to wake her and give her the Gary I hid under my pillow. But I didn't. I just lay there, listening to the sound of her hunger mixing with mine. When she had money, she spent it all on me and Papa. When she didn't, she'd pray harder, whispering under her breath, "God, please, even if it's just one more day of strength." Sometimes she'd go out early in the morning to look for work. Washing clothes for people, cleaning shops, pounding yam in restaurants. She'd come home late, her hands swollen, her feet covered in dust. And still, she'd ask me, "Did you eat anything today?" Even when I said yes, she'd touch my cheek, like she could feel the truth through my skin. It was a hot afternoon. The kind of afternoon when the sun felt angry, when the classroom smelled of chalk, dust, and sweat. I remember that day so clearly. Not because it was special, but because it was the day hunger finally defeated my pride. That morning, we had nothing to eat. Mama had searched through every corner of the house. Under the bed, beside the stove, even inside old plastic containers. Hopping to find a few forgotten grains of rice. She didn't find any. So she just sighed and said, "Go to school, my daughter. Maybe someone will help you." I nodded, even though my chest felt heavy. I didn't want to keep hopping for someone else's help. But I went anyway. Because what else could I do? By the time I got to school, I was already dizzy. I sat in class, watching the teacher's lips move. But her words floated in and out of my ears like wind. When the bell for break rang, the sound hit me like a reminder. Another lunch hour, I had nothing to eat. I lowered my head as my classmates jumped up, laughing. Their bags opening, their wrappers rustling with snacks. Then, like every other day, Chisholm stood up quietly, holding her lunchbox. It was that same blue lunchbox. The one that gleamed like new money, even after weeks of use. I could almost smell what was inside it before she even opened it. She tucked it under her arm and walked out of the classroom, her slippers barely making a sound. Usually, she carried her food everywhere she went. She never left it behind, not once. But that day was different. She had barely reached the door when another student called her name from outside. She turned, hesitated, then dropped the lunchbox on her seat and said, "I'll be back." And just like that, she left. I didn't move at first. I just sat there, staring at the blue lunchbox, pretending I wasn't looking at it. But the truth is, from the moment she stepped out, my eyes refused to leave it. The smell crept into my nose. Slowly, teasingly. The rich scent of rice and oil and something spicy. Something my stomach recognized before my mind did. I could almost taste it on my tongue. I told myself to look away. I tried. But hunger makes the body move before the mind agrees. Minutes passed. The classroom was half empty now. Most pupils were outside eating or playing. A few were still inside. But they were busy with their own food or jokes. None of them looking my way. That was when it happened. My hand, shaking, reached out slowly, almost like it didn't belong to me. I touched the lid. Warm. I pulled it closer, heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. I whispered, "Just one taste, just one." My voice was barely a breath. I opened it. The moment the lid lifted, the smell hit me full in the face. Hot rice, stew, and fried plantain. The kind of food you only saw at Christmas. The steam curled up like it was alive, wrapping around my face, filling my head with memories of all the times I'd gone to bed hungry. I stared at it, my throat tight, my eyes stinging for no reason I could explain. For a moment, I hesitated. My hands trembled. I thought of Mama's voice in my head saying, "Never take what's not yours, Amara, no matter how hungry you are." But another voice, softer, deeper, whispered back, "It's just one bite, no one will know." And that was the one I listened to. I dipped my fingers into the rice, slowly, carefully, and picked just a little. It was warm. The oil slicked my fingers as I lifted it to my mouth. The first taste. God. It melted on my tongue like something holy. My whole body sighed. I forgot where I was. Forgot who I was. For a few seconds, it felt like my life wasn't poor anymore. Like I was sitting at a table full of food. Like I was someone else's daughter. I chewed slowly, eyes closed, letting the flavor linger. Then I swallowed. When I opened my eyes again, everything felt strange. The classroom looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. It was quieter. Too quiet. The laughter outside had faded. Even the wind had stopped moving the curtains. A chill crawled over my skin. The kind that doesn't come from cold, but from something unseen. The air felt thicker, heavier. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A shadow moving along the wall. Quick, like it was hiding. I blinked. It was gone. I hurriedly closed the lunchbox, wiped my hands on my skirt, and sat up straight, pretending nothing happened. But my heartbeat refused to calm down. I could still feel it in my throat, thudding hard, like a warning drum. A few minutes later, Chisholm walked back into the classroom. She didn't look at me at first. She went straight to her seat, lifted the lunchbox, and paused. Her eyes slowly turned to me. For the first time, she smiled. Not like before. Not her usual soft smile. This one was small, tight, and strange. Then she said quietly, "You touched my food." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My lips parted to deny it, but no sound came out. She kept staring, and for a moment, I felt like the whole room was spinning. Then, still smiling, she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." And that was all. She sat down, opened her lunchbox, and began to eat. Slowly, gracefully, as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something I didn't yet understand. That night, when I lay down to sleep, I felt my body grow lighter. My skin tingled, and my dreams were full of wings and whispers. And when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't sure if I was still human. That night, the wind didn't sound the same. It howled softly through the cracks in our window, carrying whispers that made the curtain tremble like something alive. I thought it was just the usual breeze, the one that blew through our compound every evening. But this one felt strange, heavier, colder. I could feel it pressing against my skin, even under the thin wrapper Mama had covered me with. We had gone to bed earlier than usual. Mama had been quiet all evening. Papa hadn't come home again, and the kerosene in the lamp had finished halfway through cooking the little pap we shared for dinner. We ate in darkness, spooning quietly, pretending the taste of sourness didn't bother us. When I finished eating, I lay down beside Mama and my little brother. Our room was small, one bed, 3 bodies, and the smell of damp wood and smoke clinging to the walls. Normally, I would fall asleep right away. But that night, my eyes refused to close. It started with a sound, a faint humming, like someone singing far away. A voice too soft to understand, but too real to ignore. I turned to Mama. She was asleep, breathing quietly. My brother's arm was over her waist, his lips half open in a dream. I listened again. The sound was still there. A woman's voice, humming a tune that sounded almost like a lullaby. I sat up slowly. My chest tightened. The air felt colder now, almost biting. Then I noticed something else. The window curtain was moving, even though there was no wind. It swayed gently, side to side, as if invisible fingers were brushing it. I wanted to wake Mama, but something in me said not to. Something deep and quiet whispered, "Just watch." I didn't know when I stood up. My body moved on its own. My bare feet touched the floor. It was freezing. I walked toward the window, each step careful, slow. My heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I reached the curtain, I pushed it aside. And for a moment, everything stopped. The world outside wasn't like before. The sky wasn't black, it was deep purple. And the moon shone brighter than I'd ever seen. So bright it looked almost alive. The trees behind our house were swaying. But there was no wind. The leaves shimmered faintly, as if light was moving through them. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something. A shadow floating near the mango tree. It wasn't a person. Not really. It had no legs, no face. Just a shape soft, moving slowly like smoke. I blinked, and it was gone. My whole body was trembling now. I backed away from the window. But before I could climb back on the bed, I felt something else. A strange heat spreading through my chest. It burned, but not painfully. It was the kind of heat that felt alive, like fire trapped under my skin. I gasped, trying not to wake Mama. But the warmth kept spreading to my arms, my legs, even my head. I fell to my knees, pressing my hand against my chest, and whispered, "What's happening to me?" No one answered. Then I felt it. My feet lifted. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But when I looked down, the floor was no longer under me. I was floating, just a few inches, but enough for fear to grip me. My wrapper slipped off, and I reached for the bedpost to hold myself down. But my hands passed through it, like smoke through smoke. That was when I screamed. But the sound didn't leave my mouth. It echoed only in my head. Mama didn't move. My brother didn't stir. It was like time had frozen around them. The humming returned. Louder this time. Clearer. It came from outside the window. Sweet and cold, and terrifying at the same time. Then I heard words. Soft ones. You tasted what wasn't yours. Now you belong to us. My heart nearly stopped. I looked around wildly. But there was no one there. Only shadows dancing on the wall, stretching long and thin like arms reaching for me. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. The warmth faded. The humming stopped. And I dropped, hard onto the floor. The sound woke Mama. She sat up quickly, her voice filled with sleep and fear. "Amara, what is it?" I opened my mouth to speak, but I couldn't tell her. How do you tell your mother you just floated in the air? How do you say you heard voices in the wind? So I just said, "Nothing, Mama, I fell." She sighed, rubbed my back, and told me to sleep beside her. I did, but even as she held me close, I kept my eyes open, staring at the window, waiting for the humming to return. It didn't come back that night, but I knew something had changed. Because the next morning, when I woke up, there was dirt under my fingernails. And outside, behind our house, were footprints, small barefoot, and leading into the bush. Mama said maybe I walked in my sleep. But deep down, I knew it wasn't sleep. Something had called me. And now, it would never let me go. After that night, I tried to tell myself it was just a dream. That maybe I'd imagined everything. The shadow, the humming, the floating. That maybe it was hunger playing tricks on my mind again. But deep down, something told me it was. Something inside me knew. It was the food. It had to be the food. Still, I went to school the next morning. My eyes heavy, my steps slow. The world feeling a little tilted. Like everything was half a second behind me. The first strange thing happened in class. I was writing when I noticed my pencil moving faster than my hand. It was small, just a flick, but I saw it. I stopped, blinked, and my name was already written on the paper. Only I hadn't written it. The handwriting looked like mine, but neater. Perfect. I dropped the pencil immediately. Chisholm, my seatmate, looked at me and smiled faintly. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was soft, too soft, like it was coming from somewhere else. I nodded quickly, and she looked down at her book again, still smiling to herself. The next day, Mama sent me to fetch water from the stream after school. I went with my plastic bowl, walking the narrow path through the bush. It was late, the sun was already turning orange, and the air smelled of dust and dry leaves. When I got to the stream, it was empty. No one else around. I bent down to fill my bowl, and that's when I saw it. My reflection. It didn't look wrong, but it didn't move when I did. I blinked. It didn't. I tilted my head. It watched me, smiling. Not a real smile, just a small, crooked curve that made my heart race. The water rippled, and when it cleared again, The reflection was gone. I ran home, spilling half the water on the way. The next week, it got worse. I began hearing things. Not voices, exactly, but whispers that followed me. Sometimes they came from behind the cupboard. Sometimes from the corners of the classroom. Sometimes from inside my own head. They never said full sentences. Just short, broken words. Come. Say. Fly. Hunger. Each time I heard them, my skin prickled, and my stomach twisted like it wanted something it couldn't name. At school, I couldn't sit still anymore. The teachers said I was distracted. My classmates began avoiding me. They said my eyes looked strange. I didn't understand what they meant. Until one afternoon, I looked into the classroom window and saw a faint light glowing around my pupils. Just for a moment, like candlelight trapped inside me. I blinked and it disappeared. But I saw Chisholm watching from the corner of the room. She wasn't surprised. She just nodded slightly, as though she had been waiting for it. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd feel my body go light again, like something inside me wanted to rise. Once, Mama sent me to sweep the compound. As I bent down, the broom slipped from my hand and hung in the air. For a split second, before falling back to the ground, I screamed. Mama ran out. What happened? I told her the truth. She frowned, wiped her hands on her wrapper, and said I must be tired. But I saw it in her eyes. Fear. Another time, while helping her fry a curra in front of the house, I accidentally brushed my hand against the hot pan. But I didn't feel anything. No pain. No burn. When Mama checked, the skin was smooth, untouched. She crossed herself, muttering, "Chink, Biko, what is this?" That night, she prayed beside me for hours, calling on every name of God she knew. I closed my eyes. But even in the dark, I saw faint figures moving around the room. Shapes that glowed softly, whispering my name. They weren't frightening anymore. They felt familiar. Almost like family. That scared me the most. Days turned into weeks. I stopped feeling hunger the way I used to. I could go the whole day without eating anything. And still feel full. Too full, like there was something already living inside me. Mama grew thinner, worried. She thought I was sick. She tried giving me herbs, pepper soup, even palm oil to drink. But nothing changed. I just smiled and told her I was fine. Because deep down, I knew what was wrong with me couldn't be healed with herbs. I knew it started the moment I put that spoonful of rice in my mouth. Chisholm's food. And though I tried to act normal, every time I looked at her in class, she looked back, with that same small, knowing smile. One day she leaned close and whispered, "Doesn't it feel better now?" I didn't understand. "The hunger," she said. "You don't feel it anymore, do you?" My heart stopped. I shook my head slowly. She nodded. "Good, you're learning." And before I could ask what she meant, she stood up and walked away, her shadow stretching longer than it should have, curling toward mine like it wanted to hold hands. That was when I realized it. The truth I didn't want to say out loud. Whatever I had eaten that day, it wasn't food. It was something else. And I hadn't just swallowed it. It had swallowed me. They began as shapes on the wall, moving even when there was no light, no flame, no reason for a shadow to exist. One night I saw one crouched by the door, staring at me with eyes that glowed faintly like dying embers. I screamed, but when my mother rushed in and lit the lamp, nothing was there. Another night, I felt something cold touch my feet. I thought it was a rat, but when I looked, I saw a hand, black and thin like burnt wood, slide under my mat and disappear. I stopped sleeping on the floor after that. But the worst nights were the ones when I found myself standing outside barefoot, without remembering how I got there. I would wake up to the sound of my mother shouting my name, her lantern swaying wildly as she ran out to find me. Sometimes, she found me near the bush behind our house. Once, she found me sitting on the roof, my eyes wide open, humming that same song I heard in class. Keoma, Keoma, she would cry, dragging me down, holding me so tightly as if she could pull whatever had taken over me out through my skin. But I never remembered those moments clearly. It was like being awake and asleep at the same time. I could feel myself moving, but I wasn't the one controlling my body. Something else was. And each night I felt weaker, colder. I began to hear the voice of the rich girl in my dreams, soft and mocking. Did you enjoy the food, Keoma? You shouldn't have eaten what wasn't yours. I would try to scream, to tell her I was sorry, but my mouth wouldn't open. My voice was gone. Sometimes, I woke up with sand in my mouth, as if I had been eating the earth itself. Other times, my mother found scratches on my arms deep, red, and shaped like claws. She would cry while rubbing palm oil and salt on the wounds, whispering prayers and calling on God to save her only child. But the prayers seemed to make the shadows angrier. That night, the wind howled through the cracks in our wall, and I heard laughter echoing outside, not human laughter, but something sharp and echoing, like metal scraping against stone. After that, I stopped telling my mother everything. She was already too worried. I didn't want her to see the things that I saw. But it was already too late. Because every night before I fell asleep, I could see the outline of a figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting, smiling faintly in the dark. And deep down, I knew it was her. The girl whose food I had eaten. The final night. That night the air felt different, heavy, still. Even the crickets were silent. Mama said she had a dream that something was coming for me, something dark, something she couldn't fight. She didn't let me sleep alone that night. She placed me beside her on the old bamboo bed, holding my hand so tightly that her palms grew damp with sweat. Nothing will take you away from me, Keoma, she whispered over and over. Not when I'm still breathing. Her voice trembled. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep inside, I knew it was already too late. Because even as she prayed, I could hear them, the whispers louder than ever before. Keoma, come home, come where you belong. They were outside, around the house, inside the walls, inside my head. I could feel them moving, gliding like smoke through the cracks in the wood, through the roof, through me. I turned to look at Mama, and for a moment, I saw her face through a fog, like a picture fading. Her lips were still moving in prayer, but I could barely hear her voice. Everything around me began to blur, the walls, the bed, even the faint orange light of the lantern. Mama, I whispered weakly, they're here again. She gripped my shoulders, shaking me. No, Keoma, they will not take you. Say the name of Jesus, say it. But my mouth wouldn't open anymore. It was like something invisible was pulling me backward, out of my body, out of the world. I felt myself falling, yet I was lying still. I could see Mama's tears, glistening on her face, as she screamed for my father to wake up. Papa rushed in, his eyes wide with fear, his hands trembling as he sprinkled water on my face. Keoma, wake up, please. But I wasn't asleep. I was standing behind them, watching. I saw Mama shake my lifeless body. I saw Papa shouting my name. I saw myself lying there, eyes half open, lips pale still. And then I understood. I wasn't inside anymore. The room grew darker. The shadows thickened and began to move like a swarm of black mist. From within them, shapes began to form, faces, hands, wings. They called me softly. Come, Keoma, you're one of us now. I wanted to run to Mama, to tell her I was still here, to beg her not to cry. But when I reached out to touch her shoulder, my hand passed right through her. Mama, I whispered. But she didn't hear me. Papa fell to his knees, crying into his hands. Mama clung to my body, shaking her head. No, my only child. God, please bring her back. The air grew cold. The lantern flickered and died. And in that silence, I felt myself fading, drifting toward the open door, where the night waited like a mouth. I looked back one last time. Mama's arms were still wrapped around me, rocking what was left of me. That was the moment I realized I was no longer part of their world. Outside, the night glowed faintly blue, and I could see them, the ones who had been calling me. They looked like people, but not quite. Their skin shimmered like water, and their eyes were the color of the moon. They smiled when they saw me. "Now you understand," one of them said. "You ate what was not yours, and now you belong to us." I wanted to fight, to scream, but my voice had become wind. My body was gone. I was light and shadow, floating between worlds. Back inside, Mama was still praying. Papa had lit a candle. Their cries pierced the silence, but I could only stand by the window, watching, wishing they could see me one more time. "Mama," I tried to say, "Papa," but they couldn't hear me. They will never hear me again. And so I stood there until the first rooster crowed, until the sky began to turn gray. Then I followed the shadows into the bush, disappearing with them into a world I didn't understand. That was the night I stopped being human. The night my parents lost their only child. The night I became a whisper. Now I watch them every day. Mama still sets a plate of food for me on my birthday. Papa still calls my name whenever the wind blows through the door. They don't know I'm there, standing quietly in the corner, waiting. Waiting for the day they will finally see me again.